Thanks, Jessica, for hanging out and eating all that eggless mayo. It's good to be here with you, and hi to everyone watching on the live stream. I'm especially proud to be here with this man because I have been doing this for only 5 years. And decades ago, when I was playing football trying to figure my life out, Wayne was fighting for animals, figuring out a different approach to do all the good that we'll be talking about. And we're at Google. This is land of the information economy here. And we know about the information economy, and we know the wealth that it's created, we know the freedom that it's created, but you talk about a different kind of economy, the humane economy. So I think we should start, what is that? And then we'll get into a good conversation together.
Yeah, no, that's great. Hey, everybody here and online, and it's a great pleasure to be with Josh, who is really one of the pioneers of the humane economy. And you know, I think of the history of our country, and you think of all of the changes that have been wrought in so many different domains. I mean, social issues. I mean, we're a country that has dealt with so many pressing social justice issues. I mean, for the first 80 years in our history, we had chattel slavery. For the first 140 years, we denied women the right to vote. As recently as the 1950s, we had violence breaking out in the South and other parts of the country on race issues. We've had an incredible kind of interest and also enormous movement on LGBT issues in the last few years. And one of the issues that I think is one of the most emergent issues, which of course is the subject of the book and the reason why I chose the title, is the humane economy and animal issues. But these changes are seen not just in social issues, but in technology. I mean, the world changes so fast, faster than ever. And if you think about all the different domains in which we look at how we conduct our lives, how we get around, how we process information, it's crazy to think of the changes. It was wild as a notion to think humans would engage in flight. I mean, the transition from the horse and buggy to the internal combustion engine was obviously a huge change. All the changes in information technology, in photography. I mean, we could go through every one, and obviously the whole idea of search and information gathering is a big part of the changes that are just running through society. Yep. So in this book, I'm talking about the changes that are happening in our human relationship with animals. Some are very intentional, where we are designing new ways to live our lives and conduct business that reflects a greater consciousness about animals. And you, I think, are a great example of that because you have a sensibility and a concern for animals. But there are other changes that are being wrought just because people are seeking greater efficiencies. I mean, the famous statement within the animal protection movement and its history is that Henry Ford, not Henry Bergh, who was the founder of the ASPCA, really was the one who liberated the horse in so many ways in the 19th century. And I think through intentional innovation and just innovation, I mean morally intentional innovation versus just innovation that comes through efficiency, we're seeing incredible changes. So this book is kind of a chronicle, and it's also a little bit of a political science treatment of how these changes are occurring in our society.
It's interesting in thinking about the humane economy and following Wayne's work. We're in a day where earlier today, Wayne and I were discussing earlier, John Boehner, in referring to Ted Cruz, called him Lucifer in the flesh. We got Democrats fighting with each other and Republicans fighting with each other, and a lot of partisanship out there. And the energy I get from this book in your work, Wayne, it feels different in tone. And I wonder if you could describe that a little bit, because everyone, whether you love your dog, you love your cat, or you just think that animals generally should be treated better, can come to sort of a common agreement that best not to do a lot of harm. But there's a tone to it. And I'm wondering if you could touch a little bit on that in the context of this book and your work.
Well, you referenced my involvement in this issue for many years, and I've been at it a long time. I was a sophomore in college in the mid-'80s, and I started an animal advocacy group. And at the time, I think it was really almost a protest movement. I mean, these ideas were not top of mind for people. The whole term animal rights was kind of an unusual one. It was a very provocative one. And to even talk about things like agriculture and think about eating more plant-based foods, talk about being a vegetarian, those were a bit heretical at that time. And I think over these last 30 years, we've seen these ideas move from the margins to the mainstream, and that the notion of protecting animals has become normalized. And the idea that cruelty to animals is wrong is a universal value. Every single state has an anti-cruelty statute that forbids malicious treatment of individual animals. And now, thanks to South Dakota passing a law in 2014, all 50 states have felony level penalties for these malicious acts of cruelty. So I think, and to your point, Josh, the basic issue that animal cruelty is wrong is settled. The difficulty comes in applying anti-cruelty principles in a world where animals are embedded in so many different industries in our society. They're embedded in food and agriculture, and a lot of people don't think about it. You know, we get our food from a cafeteria, and obviously you guys actually do fabulous food here. Bon Appetit management does your food service here, and they're an absolute leader in humane and sustainable eating issues. So it's great to have the marriage of these two fabulous companies. But you know, these notions of treating animals well in the food system may not be intuitive to people because we're so far removed from the food system. You know, we get our stuff from the cafeteria, as I was saying, or from a restaurant, or from a supermarket, and we don't know the backstory unless we actively search it out, or if we've had some opportunity to now see a documentary or to read about it. And you know, what you're doing, Josh, I think is an incredible business venture, because you are giving people choices. We were hostage before because, you know, the standard American diet. You know, we were told when I was growing up, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had a construct for the ideal diet called the basic 4 food groups. And you were basically told you were going to be unhealthy. You know, kids, especially boys, you know, who want to, you know, grow fast and they want to have muscles and be strong, they were told that you have to eat from each of these 4 food groups liberally. So you've got meat in one category, and then dairy and eggs in a second category. Yep. Then all the fruits and vegetables were bunched into one, even though there are so many different fruits and vegetables, and then you have grains in the other. And this was how industry worked through the government to kind of project what we were supposed to eat. And we've been told through all of these government programs that meat makes you, you know, it makes you strong, you need the protein, if you eat plant-based foods, you're going to be deficient. And what you've done and I'm sure most people here know what Hampton Creek is, and Jessica gave us that introduction, but you're producing a plant-based egg that, you know, people have no idea that eggs are hidden in so many products. I mean, they're in muffins, and they're in cakes, and they're in pasta, and they're ingredients in so many other foods, and we don't even see it. Yeah. So you're creating an opportunity for people to have all the good things that eggs do for us in terms of protein and other nutritional properties, having the binding qualities of the product because it's an ingredient that keeps things together, but with none of the animal cruelty. And that's why I was so happy to profile Josh and then his colleague and my colleague, Josh Balk, in the book, because I think you guys are incredible innovators. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, you know, as someone who I think is providing choices to people. Yeah. I mean, what's the balance between like your innovation and your moral purpose here? Yeah. I mean, how do you navigate that?
Well, you know, when we started 5 years ago, I don't know if I would have said this publicly 5 years ago, but if we were having a private conversation together, and you asked me about the biggest food companies in the world and the biggest retailers in the world, I would have said they mostly don't get it at all. Right? I would have said they're made up of people who, you know, they're fine, but they don't have a lot of compassion. They don't have a lot of goodness in them. And one thing we've learned in the last 5 years is that's actually wrong. And it leads to how we think about things and balancing that. That we have found out that when you approach food, this thing, this system that is so personal, that is so connected to our identity, in a way that is not about clashing with folks, in a way that is built on our identity, in a way where, just like everyone agrees that animals shouldn't be treated cruelly, everyone also agrees, all things being equal, food that's a little bit better for the body and a little bit better for the planet should taste better and be affordable. There's not a lot of disagreement, you know? Whether you go to a Donald Trump rally or a Bernie Sanders supporter, you probably agree with that.
Yeah.
And we believe that as long as we can figure out a way to make that good thing taste better and be more affordable, change is instigated by that. So in some ways, we don't feel like we're sacrificing profits. That is connected to how we think about things and how we do things. And I know that in thinking about the humane economy, right, we established this baseline. Everyone, doesn't matter who you are, there's some baseline care that's been recognized legally, it's been recognized culturally, it's been recognized morally for animals. And you got entrepreneurship trying to do something about it. But one thing you've done and your organization, HSUS, has done is to say that whether you're General Mills or Nestle or Walmart or your Burger King or your McDonald's, that there are good people in these companies that, if approached in the right way, agree with this.
Because most people want to do good,
yeah.
Right? I mean, it's this whole notion that somehow that everybody's bad, you know, populating these enormous companies is false. And we've seen that in terms of our campaigns in getting companies to just procure their eggs from cage-free operations. So many of the companies now are sourcing some of your Hampton Creek products, which is an amazing thing. I mean, how many stores are you in now? And
so today we're in about 21,000 locations. You can find us in 2,300 public schools, 472 universities, every single solitary Walmart. We're in fancy restaurants like Beefsteak in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
We're also in places like the Dollar Tree that you might not expect us to be in.
Because you're competitive on price.
Because we figure out a way to be competitive in price. And we, every once and again, you know, you find these individuals at these companies who figure out a way to really align the profit and the purpose. And you mentioned Bon Appetit, who runs food here. I think they're a part of it. I think the wider Compass Group, big food service company, is a part of it. Executives at Walmart, you know, Wayne, are a part of it. And I think that bodes well in the intro to your book, in talking about suffering and talking about torture and talking about devastation of animals. You said hope, and you talked about that. And what are, in doing all this research, spending all this time while you're running this big organization, what are one or two bright spots of just scintillating hope that you see out there? You're just like, you look at it, for the folks in here who love animals, and you say, quit the pessimism. Something's going on here.
Well, we're at a moment of great change in our society. I mean, we do recognize that animal cruelty is wrong. We now do see the power of the human mind to figure out ways to do things better. So if you've got a moral purpose and you have a moral problem, how do we solve that problem? Let's figure out a way to meet our basic needs. Let's figure out a way to generate jobs and wealth, but not leave a trail of animal victims in the process. And I think one of the big conclusions in my book is that if you look at different sectors of the economy, you look at food and ag, wildlife management, fashion, use of animals in cosmetic testing, chemicals, drug testing, other domains, we're seeing incredible gains across the board in all these areas. If you saw one area that was popping up because you had a visionary, you know, entrepreneur like you, or you had, you know, a terrible incident that came to light and that raised consciousness, and then people responded to that, you would say, okay, well, that was just that set of facts and circumstances that drove that outcome. But when you see last month that SeaWorld said it's going to end its breeding of orcas just 3 years after the release of Blackfish, the movie that was serially run on CNN, and a year before that, Ringling Brothers said it was going to end its use of elephants in circus acts. I mean, those are two big brands in the world of live animal entertainment. In fact, with elephants and orcas right at the center of the brand, for those companies to change is symbolically significant. I mean, it may not affect the lives of that many animals, certainly not relative to agriculture, but it's a big deal. When Cecil, the lion, was killed last July, and this Minnesota trophy hunter with a bow and arrow had his face splashed all over social media and traditional media, I mean, the world responded to that. And within 3 weeks, 45 of the biggest global airlines, including all the big US carriers, Delta, American, and United, said, we're not going to ship trophies in our cargo hold of African lions or elephants or rhinos or Cape buffalo or leopards. I mean, so the world is changing. Cosmetic companies, I mean, it used to be just the regular process for all these cosmetic makers to test on animals with a lethal dose 50 test or the Dre's eye irritancy test. And now you have hundreds of these companies that have said, we are not going to test our products on animals. They're using safe ingredients and they're using alternative methods. And then this revolution in food with, in the last 7 months, 140 of the biggest brand names in food. From McDonald's to Walmart to Burger King to Sodexo to Norwegian Cruise Lines. I mean, every name you could think of, they've all committed to source their eggs from cage-free operations. So you see that in all these different arenas, something's happening. Now, it's a dizzyingly complex world in terms of our human relationship to animals. And there's still so many enormous problems. But for me, it does give me hope because it shows that our focus in trying to drive change can yield results. If we are good enough and strong enough as organizations to drive this, we're going to find great people within these companies. We're going to reach consumers who are increasingly concerned. Young people have now had access because of Google and other information aggregators to find out what's happening to animals on factory farms, or to find out what's happening in cosmetic testing laboratories, or to expose Walter Palmer for shooting that lion. This information is closing the distance between our world and what happens to animals. And I think the other part of this, which I kick back to you, is people have to have options. If you're living in some small, rural part of the United States and you've got a little airport, you may be lucky if there's one commercial carrier who is offering service to you if you need to travel long distance. So you're a hostage to that one company. You gotta get your flight when they leave and at the price you want because you don't have a choice. I mean, you can't drive 1,000 miles. So that's the way it was with eggs. That's the way it was with a lot of products. We didn't have choices. And now you, with your company, are giving people choices that enable people then to act on their beliefs. And if you're concerned about the mistreatment of animals in the food supply, here's one way to just kind of keep things perfectly clean and eat the products that you're providing that are equivalent or superior on nutrition and price, and way superior on the moral side of it. And I imagine that's why you think you're seeing success on a lot of fronts.
I mean, the way we think about it is whether we're making a cookie or mayo or dressings or pasta, whatever the heck it is we're making as a company, that we got 310 million Americans, 7.1 billion people on the planet. A tiny fraction of those folks, let's call them just not good at all, just like flat out evil, a tiny fraction of them. We want the evil folks out there to eat our stuff because it is more delicious than anything else out there and is more affordable than anything else out there. You got a lot of people in this world that are poor. They're just poor, right? And they simply don't have a lot of options. And all things being equal, they'd feed their kids good things. But unfortunately, just like my mom growing up, she didn't have a lot of money to do the right thing. We want the poor people out there to end up choosing the thing that's more connected to who they are, connected to their values, because it's more affordable and because it tastes better, right?
Yep.
And there are a lot of people, Wayne, as we all know, I mean, especially the people who work at one of the most extraordinary companies in the world that we're talking to now, who are just too damn busy. You're just too busy. You have 1,000 things going on in your life, and you can't contemplate ethical choices every single moment, right? We all should, of course, but it makes it difficult. Our system has made that difficult. So if you can make it easy for the busiest people in the world to do the right thing by just having it delicious, having it available everywhere, you don't have to take 20 little steps or big steps to get it, then you end up hopefully doing something better.
It goes from a niche sort of concern. I say that people who are really concerned about animals will sacrifice. When I was eating in the dining hall in 1984, we didn't have a Bon Appetit management that our university was sourcing from. And I had to go in the back with the cooks and make my own food. And I was like, not a very good cook. I was like giving them advice and showing them how to use tofu and these other things. And I was willing to go in the back. right? And to deal with that and the inconvenience of it, and then walking out in the dining hall with this like different thing that everyone is like mocking me for, or talking to me about. And now, you know, that has a low ceiling in terms of the number of people who do that. But we want to reach 95%, not 5%.
That's it. I mean, think about it, you know, to use another analog outside the world of, you know, food, this food system. And I know the folks at this company think in terms of systems. And think about energy. Think how many times in your life you've walked into a room and you flipped a light switch. And that light switch has set off a chain of reaction that has gone to a coal-fired power plant within 65 square miles, right? I guarantee you 99% of the folks who work here believe in the science of climate change. You believe we should do something to mitigate extinction. You believe in protecting the environment. Like every time you flip that switch, you're doing something that's misaligned with your values. Not because you're a bad person, but because it's easy, it's accessible, and it works.
You're a hostage.
In other words, it's bound in the system. And I think figuring out a way through laws, and I'd love you to touch on that too, Wayne, through laws, through commerce, through working with the biggest companies, is unraveling the system to create something a little bit better. And on that, I mean, we talk about, you know, we talk about entrepreneurship. You talk about some of these biggest companies who have figured out a way to say, we don't need to confine, we can have a little bit more freedom. We don't need to cram, we can have a little bit more openness.
Yeah.
But the Humane Society has done really trailblazing work at understanding how to unpack the legalities, the laws, state, national, around all this. Maybe you could touch a little bit on that, how that opens up this humane economy too.
Well, I wrote a piece not long ago for Foreign Affairs magazine about the interplay of strategies, so congressional strategies, state legislative strategies, ballot measures, as well as corporate campaigns, the courts. And you think of the gay rights cause. I mean, we were doing ballot measures in states for the last 25 years. And we were outlawing cockfighting or the use of steel-jawed leg hold traps or confinement systems for animals on factory farms. And on the same ballot with us were often anti-gay rights ballot measures. In fact, when we did Prop 2 here 7-8 years ago to ban confinement of animals on factory farms, Prop 8 was on the ballot, which was an anti-gay marriage measure. And that measure passed while Prop 2 also passed. So it was an incredible run of losses that the gay rights community had on those sets of those gay marriage questions, like 32 straight or something that they lost. But they kept at it, and their big arena of success or pathway of success was through the courts. I mean, once more people came out of the closet, started talking about their sexual orientation, it just became part of society, and the whole fear of it was demystified. And the numbers in terms of acceptance of these ideas flipped in society, where it was fewer than 50% of the people were tolerant of that lifestyle. Then it became a majority sentiment. And then the courts invalidated those state statutes, invalidated federal laws that discriminated. And one of the things that I've seen in our work is that we're working all these different channels. Sometimes we're working in the courts, and then we're working in the Congress, and we're doing ballot measures, and we're working with these corporations. We had a case where the egg industry actually agreed to set a minimum standard in terms of space allocation and enrichment standards for the hens in agriculture. And the other sectors of the farm lobby, the beef and the pork industry and the Farm Bureau, blocked it in Congress. But it didn't stop us, because then we just went around, and my colleague Josh Balk and Paul Shapiro, and they started talking to the big food sellers in the United States and said, hey, we've got a majority of people who care about these issues. Look at these polls. 85% of people don't want to see animals in extreme confinement. Look at what California did when this issue was on the ballot. Look at the health issues. Look at the brand that you're trying to build. You don't want to be associated with this sort of animal cruelty. And so many of these companies have changed. So what an incredible thing to see how these reinforcements, when we do a ballot measure, it sets up the corporate campaigns. Yep. When we do a corporate campaign, it sets up success for a ballot measure, or it sets up success in the courts. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is that people like you are now making it easier. You know, we just came from Veggie Grill, you know, a new company.
Yeah.
It's like a fast food type, plant-based company. I mean, I couldn't have stopped there, you know, years ago. It didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so many companies are now working to give us more options. And I guess I had a question for you. It might be a tough question, but you know, you see that HSUS has negotiated all these agreements with these big food companies on cage-free eggs, and here you are with a plant-based egg substitute. Are you concerned? Are we undermining you with this idea of, more cage-free as the minimum standard in society? Because that's what's going to happen. I mean, over the next 6 or 7 years, all the cages are going to be pulled out of these enormous factory farms. You're still going to have intensive raising of laying hens. They're going to be big buildings in a lot of cases, but does that concern you from a business perspective?
No, I think I heard someone say, I wish I remembered who said this because it has always impacted me, that compassion is like a muscle. You know, the more you work it, the stronger it gets. And these executives at the biggest companies in the world, executives that are, in a lot of ways, they're influencing these billions of dollars of food flows. Is it bad? Is it good? Is it easy to eat well? Is it hard to eat well, right? When the Humane Society, in a thoughtful, intellectual, rational way, describes the market, describes the options, and you begin to open up the mind and the heart to these things. When we go in and we have conversations, there's an openness, there's an awareness of what's happening. So it's, and the reality, Wayne, is we didn't start Hampton Creek to do anything but try to use the force of capitalism to have an impact. We want it to happen all over the place, and we want more companies to read your book to try to compete with us. That's how change really happens.
Yeah, you know, I have a chapter in this book that really is about the innovators in the food and agriculture area, and the preceding chapter is really about the cage-free and crate-free movement and kind of running the table on that issue. And we will see the end of extreme confinement in the United States in just the next few years. But what you're doing at Hampton Creek, and what Beyond Meat is doing and Impossible Foods, and also what Modern Meadow is doing in terms of cell culture meat, I talk about in this chapter where I feature you and Josh Balk and others. And the title of this chapter is called The Chicken or the Egg, or Neither. And I start off with this quote from Winston Churchill in 1931 in an essay titled 50 Years Hence. Now, Winston Churchill is a visionary guy, but I never knew this dimension of him. He said, "We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. Synthetic food will, from the outset, be practically indistinguishable from natural products." And I mean, think about this guy nearly a century ago saying that. I mean, it is kind of crazy, you know, at some level. I mean, these animals, putting them by the tens of thousands in the case of laying hens in a single building. I mean, I went to one farm in Iowa that had 150,000 hens jammed into cages that were stacked 8 high. The cages were side to side for a football field length, and there were 93 houses. There were 10 million birds at this complex. There are 3 million people in all of Iowa. You know, our media chases these people around Iowa, you know, for months in advance of the Iowa caucuses every 4 years. And there are 99 counties in that state. Think of it, one farm had 10 million birds. And you think, you know, as my friend Matthew Scully said, factory farming is a case of human ingenuity detached from conscience. What if we could have kind of agriculture and human ingenuity attached to conscience? I mean, that's really what you're trying to do. You're creating an efficient company that can produce affordable, nutritious, complete food, but without any of the moral problems that we typically associate with these industrialized agriculture notions. And I guess this is why I feel hopeful, because I look at the history of our country and I see all the changes. And if we're determined to solve these problems, I mean, we can entertain people without having elephants standing on their head. We can feed ourselves without cramming buildings full of animals on a factory farm. We can entertain ourselves in the wild without having a bow and arrow, and we can take a camera out and watch the wildlife. I mean, these are not super hard problems, it seems to me.
Yeah.
For our society, we've got a lot of tough problems, but these don't seem to be among them.
And you were when you were sneaking back in the dining hall trying to teach those chefs how to make something or cooking it yourself. You called it.
I didn't go into that field because I had a low ceiling in terms of my ability.
Yeah, join the club, man. Yeah. But you called it, back in the day, kind of a protest movement. Right?
Yeah.
One of the getting back to things I've been surprised about in the last 5 years is billionaires across the world.
Yeah.
Influential legislatures, locally, globally, nationally. Executives at the biggest companies in the world, celebrities. It feels like in the last 5 to 10 years, these influential people, right, who determine what we watch, what we buy, where capital goes into, have almost collectively, at the same time, said, what are we doing? Maybe there's a better path. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because you can have a deep grassroots movement, but the reality of the world that we live in, whether we want to accept it or not, is influential folks hold a lot of power in politics, in finance. What are you seeing there? What's going on?
Well, leadership matters in the world. I don't see social change as just these kind of winds that are blowing that carry us along. I mean, people do influence history.
Yeah.
And, 25 years ago when David Duffield, who started PeopleSoft, became the first big philanthropist in the world of animal welfare, he said, I'm going to put $2 billion into eliminating euthanasia of dogs and cats in this country. The Wall Street Journal and other publications mocked him. Why would you do that? Now we're seeing major philanthropists and investors, really saying, hey, we need to make our society better. So you've got billionaires investing in your company because they see that it's good for the whole of society. When your company grows, your values are embedded in the products that you're selling, and that's going to turn out to be a better society. And we're seeing philanthropists putting more money into these causes, and that is transformational for us, because you need that kind of leadership. You need people to step up and imagine a better world. I mean, if we just wait for these things to happen, it won't. I mean, it always has taken human agency to drive big change. And what's more fundamental than changing our human relationship to nature and animals? I mean, animals are all around us. Nature is all around us. One of the most iconic images in contemporary American history was when in the late 1960s, when astronauts went into space with our government funding so much of that research and development, and then that space travel. Astronaut looked back and took a picture, in the vast openness of our solar system, and saw this little blue-green marble, amidst all the darkness of our solar system, which is a small portion of our galaxy, which is one galaxy among, countless galaxies. And we saw how fragile this Earth is. 70% of it is covered by water. Of the terrestrial landscape, so much of that is covered by desert and rock and ice. The habitable portion is limited. I mean, it is madness that we have 77 billion animals being raised for food on this planet every year. 77 billion. It's one person to 11 animals. So the average person in this world is eating 11 animals. In the United States, we're eating 30 animals a year per person. We cannot afford this. When I was in conversation the other night with Mark Bittman, he said if the rest of the world adopts the American diet in terms of our animal product consumption, we're going to need 4 Earths. We cannot afford this. It's terrible from an animal welfare outcome. It's horrible from an environmental perspective in terms of groundwater, the atmosphere, use of grains, use of water. I mean, these are fundamentals. And that's why we need people like you and others, figuring out a new way to feed ourselves in a way that's good and affordable, but that doesn't create this enormous, set of casualties.
I want to make sure we're really lucky to be here, in particular, a company I admire a lot. And I'd love to take a few questions from you all, and we'll continue the conversation, whether questions specifically about Wayne's book, his career, this crazy world of food that we find ourselves in, and the optimism that I think is around us more than we often realize. You can just step up to, there's the mics over there.
Hey guys, thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's always inspiring to hear both of you. And my question for you, Wayne, is you touched on legislation. And can you talk about the type of work that the Humane Society of the United States is doing on legislation, both on stopping bills that could be harmful for animals and also propelling bills forward that could be helpful?
Sure. I mean, we want to use all these different channels to drive reform, and there's such an asymmetry in power between humans and animals. We hold all the cards. We can wipe out entire species. We can have factory farms. We can stage fights between animals. So the law has to speak for animals because the animals are so vulnerable. And we're working to pass basic anti-cruelty laws and then laws in all these different arenas in which we're working, whether that's cracking down on puppy mills or banning trophy hunting of wolves or grizzly bears, or it's ending cosmetic testing on animals, or ending confinement or tail docking of dairy cows. But we also do find ourselves trying to block bad bills, and the agriculture industry has really been responsible for some doozies out there. I mean, one category of laws or bills that they've been trying to pass are what we have referred, and Mark Bittman, a food writer for the New York Times, said are ag-gag laws, to forbid citizens or staff from groups like the Humane Society of the US or the Humane League or Mercy for Animals from taking pictures or video of animals on factory farms. Now, this is the food that people in society are eating. Kids are eating, grandparents are eating, and we're not allowed to see it if it's an unauthorized image from these farms. So, you see whenever you have any social progress, there's a backlash from the people who are very invested in maintaining the status quo. So now they have right to farm laws. There were bills introduced in Oklahoma and Missouri this year to prevent Oklahomans and Missourians from contributing to animal protection organizations that do national programs. I mean, it was a transparent attempt to try to dry up our fundraising at the Humane Society because the Farm Bureau and the others don't want us doing this work.
Hey Wayne, can you tell us a little bit more about your career path to becoming the CEO for the Humane Society? Prior to this talk, I hadn't realized that was a role. And then for both of you, I want to learn more about what are the biggest challenges that your organizations are facing, and particularly what can Googlers do to help?
I had a lifelong love of animals. It wasn't just that I liked having dogs or other animals around me. I had a real empathy for all animals. I mean, I didn't want animals to be harmed if they were whales in the ocean or wolves in a national park. And I wrote a book 5 years ago called The Bond, where I argue that we humans have an instinctive connection to other creatures that's built into us. If you look at our human history, 99% of our history was as tribal societies and hunters and gatherers, and we were immersed in nature. And today we live in these urban and suburban environments where we're disconnected at some level from some aspects of nature, but we bring it into our world in the form of pet keeping. And we also go and enjoy it in terms of visiting parks and other places where we can experience nature. So animals were always part of my outlook, and I always wanted to do right by them. When I was a kid growing up, I had no idea about the many ways that we exploit animals, especially on large-scale, institutionalized scales. And I decided, when I was a college student, that I didn't want to be a bystander anymore. I saw what was happening with factory farming and trophy hunting, these other problems, and I said, I got to do something about it. So I started as a grassroots advocate, and I just volunteered, and one thing led to another, and I started writing in the field, and then I've been just kind of moving up, and it's been a real privilege to serve at HSUS. I've been CEO for 11 years, and it's a life passion for me. And I'm not a nonprofit, management executive that's moving in different sectors. I mean, I'm wanting to stop animal cruelty in the world, basically.
Joanna, you asked a question about how Google could help, right? I'll throw out something, and there's always an opportunity here when you're in front of intelligent people to hopefully do a little bit more good. I can think of a couple ways. One is we're lucky to have Jessica as an advisor and investor to the company, and Jessica here at Google has her own particular set of skills, right? In communications and strategic communications and marketing and branding and leadership. And she helps us. What are yours, right? Your particular skills, whether it's in data science, whether it's in hardcore analytics, whether it's in graphic design, whether it's in food, you and your skills can help entrepreneurs understand where they're going, right? Whether as a volunteer, whether as an advisor. You and your skills can help nonprofit organizations that we can talk more about even outside the Humane Society open up this humane economy even more. Your money can be used, if you believe in the humane economy, you believe in these common values that we share, can be used to instigate legislation that is supportive of animals, right? So those are a few ways I think, now that when you think about very concrete ways, if you believe this, and it's hard not to, you can bring your energy to bear and hopefully do a little bit more good.
Yeah, don't leave it up to us, right? I mean, we all have a role to play in society, and you said it beautifully, Josh. I mean, tap into your special talents, tap into your passions. We want to find a place for you at HSUS to work with us, whether it's 1 hour a month or 10 hours a week, whatever it is. But I think you also hit on it that we are voting for and against animal cruelty, for and against sustainability with our dollars in the marketplace every single day. We've got to be conscious consumers. The reason that so many companies in cosmetics and food are changing is because they're now registering that sentiment that exists in the marketplace, saying, hey, we've got to change because people are figuring this out. So the more we can add people to that mass consumer movement, the stronger we're going to be, the easier our job is going to be.
Wayne, we got 2 minutes left. I'm gonna give you a curveball here, and actually not ask you a question about the humane economy necessarily, but I think the depth of where it comes from. You mentioned a book that you'd written about 5 years ago, The Bond, and if you haven't read it, you should check it out. It talks about, in many ways, also the science of our connections with animals too. There was a passage about mirror neurons. I remember the book. This young boy was playing with his puppy, and you were talking about how the synapses were dancing with each other. And this idea that there's this common bond that we have to animals, not just a dog, not just a cat, but even chickens that we can't see, I think feels to me like this undergirdness, this foundation upon which the humane economy was born.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just end it a little bit. What is that about, and how central is that sort of just fundamental principle?
Well, I think that our concern and interest in animals is not just a social construct. It's something that's part of us, that we're drawn to animals like a moth is drawn to a flame. And I think the importance of this, Josh, is that we don't need to invent a social concern for animals. This instinctive impulse that we have gives us a head start. It's not the final word, though. I mean, we got to figure out this crazy society that we live in and all of these problems that intersect with our daily lives and kind of disentangle it, and then individually do what we can, and then support groups and companies that are trying to solve these problems on a macro level. So I think that an informed group of people in society who are really alert to the problems of animals are the ones who are going to drive the change. It's always been a more limited number of people who have this idea of a better civil society that have carried the rest of the people along. And eventually people say, oh my God, of course that makes sense. And you look back and you wonder how people didn't get it to start. So I just weaving from that to the humane economy, I mean, the central notion is that we've got to marry our business and our commerce with our values. When you disassociate them, you get really bad outcomes. I mean, business is, the bulwark of our society. It creates jobs and wealth and gives us opportunities for recreation and pleasure and joy. But in the conduct of that work, it should reflect the things that we care about in our society. It's not the separate sphere where we generate profits. It's the place where we generate profits and create opportunities for people and live by the principles that all of us care about. So thank you very much for participating. Thanks for your incredible leadership.
I'm honored to be here, and I'll end it with the humane economy isn't just living in Wayne's book. It's actually in the food that you eat, right? It's in some of the folks in the audience, thanks to Jessica for lending her talents to Hampton Creek. It's in the leaders like Joshua Bach, who's really spearheaded a lot of corporate welfare change with the Humane Society of the United States. It's with folks who work at my company who helped put this together. It's with Bon Appetit, the food service company that helps provide your food. It is becoming systemic, and I think that is exciting, and that gives me hope, and it's in you, man, and always proud to be standing next to you, and always excited to see what we're going to do next, Wayne. And thank you everyone on live stream.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for hanging out, and get yourself a signed copy of his book before you leave too. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.